Right, we are going to be looking at AC2.3 now, sociological theories of criminology, and we are going to be looking at functionalism. So first of all, it's important to get an overview of the functionalist theory in general, and there is a clue within the title that is the word functional. So functionalists tend to think everything has a purpose. It's a nice little mantra to consider for functionalism. And when you think about that, you need to think about the way then that functionalists will view society. They won't view society in a negative way, they will view society in a largely positive way, because everything in society, the good, the bad and the ugly, has a function, serves a purpose for society to be as healthy as it is as you look around you now. So, it begins with this idea that everything has a purpose, and the other thing to remember about the core of functionalism is that it is a consensus theory. So you might have looked at other theories that are conflict theories, like Marxism. Functionalism is a theory based on consensus, which means society is in agreement on the norms and the values. And you might think, what does that mean? Well, it's, you know, you look around and you see that every day we tend to have values that most people agree with. Hard work, for example, skill, and what, you know, they're values that we particularly enjoy. And then what do you reward people with hard work and skill with? You know, money, you know, power. Those are things that we tend to like. So, you know, think about how society does share those values. And by watching this video yourself, you must have the value of education. You must find that important. And then the norm would be that you engage in work like this and you do revision for your exams. So broadly, we're talking about a consensus theory where everything has a purpose. And that's functionalism from the base. Now, we have to link functionalism in terms of its perspective on crime to the work of Durkheim. Now, Durkheim is not trying to answer an obvious question, which might be, why do people commit crime? He's looking at the relationship between crime and society. So what is that relationship? And that's a big question to ask, and it's not a common one. And this is where the functionalist perspective, with its kind of raw positivity, is going to say things that you might find a little bit odd. Durkheim is going to say that crime is normal and is integral in a healthy society. And when he looks at crime, he breaks crime down into 4 characteristics. There's a way of you remembering them, which is furry, right? So the first thing he says is that crime is functional. It serves a purpose, just like everything in functionalism does. It has to exist because there's a purpose. Then he says it's universal. And by that he means, well, every single society that we've ever looked at through history has had things that were criminal or not criminal, deviant or not deviant. So this idea that things can be good or bad, right or wrong, deviant, not deviant, criminal, legal, is something that we've seen in every society through history. And then next he says it's relative, which means it is different from time to time and place to place. This idea of universality of crime just means that crime exists in every society, but doesn't mean that it's the same. And there's different laws in place in different societies which show that crime is relative. Take drinking laws in the UK, for example. You have to be 18 to drink. If you're drinking at 17, it's illegal. In America, if you're drinking at 20, it's illegal, because at 21, you can drink. But if you're drinking in Saudi Arabia, where alcohol is prohibited and banned, it's illegal at any age. Crime's got to be relative if that is the case. And also, you may have looked at crimes that have existed through history, crimes of the past, like witchcraft. Well, we don't think that as a crime anymore. Of course not, because it's relative. But it did happen. But it serves a purpose. When you put these 3 factors together, it leads to the idea that crime, therefore, is inevitable. Okay? Crime is bound to happen in every society. And he even says, even in ones we imagine. So now if you took your time to imagine a society whereby there was no violence of any type, and there was no theft or taking of things that didn't belong to you, you just eradicated a lot of crimes. So even verbal abuse doesn't exist, right? But you've got rid of murder, you've got rid of robbery, you've got rid of theft, you've got rid of assault and battery. Those are gone. You're like, well, what's the crime now? It's like, well, then maybe the most serious crime might be not greeting somebody on the street or saying hello, or ignoring somebody might be a crime that should be punishable with time in prison. Because crime is relative and it will differ dependent on the society that you go to. And we've seen in the past, during times of war, that the ideas of what's criminal there change, and then there may be only very serious acts that breach the Geneva Convention or or war crimes are considered the most serious, because shooting somebody who's on the opposing side to you is perfectly okay. So you've got to recognise where he's coming from there to get that very profound idea that crime is inevitable. Going back to this idea of crime being functional, you might be led to a question mark and saying, well, what do we mean by the kind of functionality of crime? And it says there are 6 different functions potentially that you could think about. I'm only going to talk about 2 functions here that are pretty straightforward. The first one might be employment. So you think about society now and go, what jobs exist because of crime? So straight away you go, well, police. It's like, probation officers, prison guards, all of those ones. But then think of the wraparound. Think about the legal system that exists because crime is there, and how small that would be if it were just solving, disputes about, land disputes and things like that. So a lot of barristers, a lot of lawyers will be needed because of crime. Locksmiths will be needed, because if there was no such thing as crime, then would you need to lock your door? CCTV operatives, security guards, the list goes on, and all of the kind of electronics that are made for you in order to protect you against crime, things like Ring doorbells, things like tags on clothing, all of that would not need to exist if you didn't have criminality, an element that you needed to defend against. So employment is a straightforward one, but think about how deep that really goes. The next one that you might have, and I'm thinking of, this is a good one. Crime can bring people together. So you see, it uses the term social cohesion, the bringing back together of a group. So take, for example, crimes like terrorism. And after terrorist attacks, after the Manchester bombing, for example, there was a concert, people were getting bee tattoos. It felt like a community was somewhat united behind this. And you get very similar cases, when you have abductions of young children or missing people, and the community come together to search for that particular person. And that would be an example of unification against criminality, when crime brings together a group of people. Obviously, what's the problem with Durkheim? And the main problem is he has no explanation for crime. He doesn't explain why crime is happening in its fullness. He just explains what the relationship is. So we've got an issue with Durkheim straight away, because obvious questions that you might want the answer for, he can't provide. But he is useful, because from Durkheim you get other writers, such as Robert Merton, who do say and ask the question, why do people commit crime? So we move on now to Merton. And Merton's theory, why do people commit crime, is something he calls strain theory. So, to understand strain theory, I'll draw a continuum here. And at one side, I'll write the American dream. I'll discuss what that is in a second. And on the other side, I'll write the means. Okay? So you want to consider Merton's theory like an elastic band. Okay? It's called strain theory. Everybody, according to Merton, is under strain. What are they under strain from? The means, how they get something, and the goal, the American dream. Now remember, the American dream sounds a lot like a value. And the American dream is an idea that you can be wealthy and rich with a big old house and independent. Okay? So that is the goal, Merton says, for everybody. And we are all working towards this goal on a kind of continuum of strain. Now, maybe I am here. I am not a millionaire. I don't have a huge mansion, but I have a steady job. It pays me an income, so I'm working towards getting to that. Maybe if you are a young person, because young people are under quite a lot of strain, you're at college, you're studying, you are under way more strain than me because you might have a part-time job or no job at all, you're reliant upon your family for money, you don't have your own house, you don't have your own property, so you're under more strain than me. And what Merton will say is that people respond to strain in 5 different ways. Now, the 5 different responses are conformity, innovator, ritualist, retreatist, and rebellion. That's a lot to get your head around. But from my perspective, I would only think that probably 2 are really essential. The conformist and the innovator. And I'll talk in more depth about those. Merton would say that the responses to the groups depend on whether or not you accept the goal and how you go about achieving it through your means, whether your means are legitimate through a job or illegitimate through ill-gotten gains and criminality. So let's think for a second about groups who might be under the most strain. So we already said young people would fall under that category, maybe working class people, and maybe ethnic minorities. They might be under more strain than any others because traditionally maybe they don't have as much money, which puts them furthest away, from getting the American dream. So you've got that group in society. And what Merton says is the response to some of those people who are under strain is to become an innovator. They are a typical criminal. When the strain gets too great, they will attempt to get an illegitimate way of getting to the American dream through crime. The other group, the conformist, I might be a good example of a conformist, is your typical person, not a criminal. I am trying to get the American dream. I may never get there, but I'm going about it a legitimate fashion. I don't commit any crime. So those are 2 of the types. And obviously it makes a lot of sense, Merton's theory, because if you look at the groups most likely to be committing crime, according to the official statistics, young working class and ethnic minorities are overrepresented in those crime stats. So there they are. And that's a great theory. The groups who are furthest away are more likely to be under the most strain, more likely to become a criminal adaptation like the innovator, who are more likely to achieve the American goal or attempt to through illegitimate means. Perfect. However, there's some problems with Merton's theory. And there's some problems with Merton's theory that come at this end of the scale, and there's some problems with Merton's theory that come at this end of the scale as well. So the first thing to think about as a problem is try and think about other groups, when I said who might be under strain, who you might consider. So if you sat there going, what about old people? They're in a lot of poverty. What about disabled people who historically maybe don't have access to the opportunities and the job roles that will get them a lot of money? What about women, if you're a feminist, saying, well, maybe women earn less, maybe this group are under the most strain, old disabled women. Well, what do we know about them in the crime statistics? Well, they don't appear in the crime statistics. They are committing almost no crime. So why would this group become innovators when this group would choose not to? And there's no explanation for that from Merton's theory. Thinking about this end, right? What about white-collar crime? Fraud, tax evasion, committed by people who are professionals with big houses and with a lot of money. Surely you wouldn't have any white-collar crime if the goal for crime was to get money and the American dream. If you've already got it, why would you do it again? Why would you continue to commit crime? It doesn't make sense. That's a big problem with Merton's theory. So what you can see here is that there are quite a few weaknesses. And I suppose the final one is, if you're considering strain theory, the focus is always on money. What about non-utilitarian crime, which means crime that's not done for the purposes of gaining wealth? What about things like vandalism, graffiti, fighting, underage drinking? Why on earth would you do that? Because that doesn't get you any closer to earning the American dream. Some big weaknesses still with Merton's theory.